A Guide to Health by Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Part 2. Some Simple Treatments. Chapter 1. Air Treatment. We have now done with the discussion of the foundations of health as well as the means of its preservation. If all men and women were to obey all the laws of health and practice strict brahmacharya, there would be no need at all for the chapters which follow, for such men and women would then be free from all ailments, whether of the body or of the mind. But where can such men and women be found? Where are they who have not been afflicted by disease? The more strictly, however, we observe the laws which have been explained in this book, the more shall we be free from disease. But when diseases do attack us, it is our duty to deal with them properly, and the following chapters are intended to show how to do it. Pure air, which is so essential to the preservation of health, is also essential to the cure of diseases. If, for instance, a man who is suffering from gout is treated with air heated by steam, he perspires profusely and his joints are eased. This kind of vapor treatment is known as Turkish bath. If a man who is suffering from high fever is stripped naked and made to sleep in the open air, there is an immediate fall in the temperature, and he feels a distinct relief. And if, when he feels cold, he is wrapped in a blanket, he perspires at once, and the fever ceases. But what we generally do is just the reverse of this. Even if the patient is willing to remain in the open air, we close all the doors and windows of the room in which he lies, and cover his whole body, including the head and ears, with blankets, with the result that he is frightened and is rendered still weaker. If the fever is the outcome of too much heat, the sort of air treatment described above is perfectly harmless, and its effect can be instantly felt. Of course, care should be taken that the patient does not begin to shiver in the open air. If he cannot remain naked, he may well be covered with blankets. Change of air is an effective remedy for latent fever and other diseases. The common practice of taking a change of air is only an application of the principle of air treatment. We often change our residence in the belief that a house constantly infested by disease is the resort of evil spirits. This is a mere delusion, for the real evil spirits in such cases are the foul air inside the house. A change of residence ensures a change of air, and with it the cure of the diseases brought on by it. Indeed, so vital is the relation between health and air that the good or evil effects of even a slight change are instantaneously felt. For a change of air, the rich can afford to go to distant places, but even the poor can go from one village to another, or at least from one house to another. Even a change of room in the same house often brings great relief to a sick man. But of course care should be taken to see that the change of air is really for the better. Thus, for instance, a disease that has been brought on by damp air cannot be cured by a change to a damper locality. It is because sufficient attention is not paid to simple precautions like this that a change of air is often so ineffectual. This chapter has been devoted to some simple instances of the application of air to the treatment of disease, while the chapter on air in part 1 of this book contains a general consideration of the value of pure air to health. Hence I would request my readers to read these two chapters side by side. End of chapter 1. Part 2, Chapter 2 of A Guide to Health. Water Cure. Since air is invisible, we cannot perceive the wonderful way in which it does its work. But the work of water and its curative effects can be easily seen and understood. All people know something of the use of steam as a curative agent. We often employ it in cases of fever, and very often severe headaches can be cured only by its application. In cases of rheumatic pain in the joints, rapid relief is obtained by the use of steam followed by a cold bath. Boils and ulcers not cured by simple dressing with ointments can be completely healed by the application of steam. In case of extreme fatigue, a steam bath or a hot water bath immediately followed by a cold bath will be found very effective. So too, in cases of sleeplessness, instant relief is often obtained by sleeping in the open air after a steam bath followed by a cold bath. Hot water can always be used as a substitute for steam. When there is severe pain in the stomach, instant relief is obtained by warming with a bottle filled with boiling water placed over a thick cloth wrapped around the waist. Whenever there is a desire to vomit, it can be done by drinking plenty of hot water. Those who are suffering from constipation often derive great benefit by drinking a glass of hot water either at bedtime or soon after rising and cleaning the teeth in the morning. Sir Gordon Spring attributed his excellent health to the practice of drinking a glass of hot water every day before going to bed and after getting up in the morning. The bowels of many people move only after taking tea in the morning, and they foolishly suppose that it is the tea which has produced this effect. But, as a matter of fact, tea only does harm, and it is really the hot water in the tea that moves the bowels. A special kind of cot is often used for steam baths, but it is not quite essential. A spirit or kerosene oil stove or a wood or coal fire should be kept burning under an ordinary cane chair. Over the fire should be placed a vessel of water with the mouth covered, and over the chair a sheet or blanket is so spread that it may hang down in the front and protect the patient from the heat of the fire. Then the patient should be seated in the chair and wrapped round with sheets or blankets. Then the vessel should be uncovered so that the patient may be exposed to the steam issuing from it. Our common practice of covering the head also of the patient is a needless precaution. The heat of the steam presses through the body right up to the head and gives rise to profuse perspiration on the face. If the patient is too weak to sit up, he may be made to lie down on a cot with interstices, taking care to see that none of the steam escapes. Of course, care should also be taken to see that the patient's clothes or the blankets used do not catch fire, and due consideration should be paid to the state of the patient's health, as an inconsiderate application of steam is fraught with danger. The patient indeed feels weak after a steam bath, but this weakness does not last long. Too frequent use of steam, however, enfeebles the constitution, and it is of the highest importance to apply steam with due deliberation. Steam may also be applied to any single part of the body. In cases of headaches, for instance, there is no need to expose the whole body to the steam. The head should be held just over a narrow-mouthed jar of boiling water and wrapped round with a cloth. Then the steam should be inhaled through the nose so that it may ascend into the head. If the nasal passage is blocked, it will also be opened by this process. Likewise, if there be inflammation in any part of the body, it alone need be exposed to the steam. Very few realize the curative value of cold water, in spite of the fact that it is even more valuable in this respect than hot water, and can be made use of by even the weakest persons. In fever, smallpox, and skin diseases, the application of a sheet dipped in cold water is very beneficial and often produces startling results, and anybody may try it without the least risk. Dizziness or delirium can be instantly relieved by tying round the head a cloth dipped in melted ice. People suffering from constipation often derive great benefits by tying round the stomach for some time a piece of cloth dipped in melted ice. Involuntary seminal discharges can also be often prevented by the same means. Bleeding in any part of the body may be stopped by the application of a bandage dipped in ice-cold water. Bleeding from the nose is stopped by pouring cold water over the head. Nasal diseases, cold and headache, may be cured by drawing pure cold water up the nose. The water may be drawn through one nostril and discharged through the other, or drawn through both nostrils and discharged through the mouth. There is no harm in the water going even into the stomach, provided the nostrils are clean. And indeed, this is the best way to keep the nostrils clean. Those who are unable to draw the water up the nostrils may use a syringe, but after a few attempts it can be done quite easily. All should learn to do this, since it is very simple and at the same time a most effective remedy against headaches, bad smells in the nose, as well as dirty accumulations in the nasal passage. Many people are afraid of taking an enema, and some even think that the body is weakened by it. But such fears are baseless. There is no more effective means of producing an instant evacuation of the bowels. It has proved effective in many diseases where all other remedies have been futile. It thoroughly cleans the bowels and prevents the accumulation of poisonous matter. If those who suffer from rheumatic complaints, or indigestion, or pains caused by an unhealthy condition of the bowels, take an enema of 2 pounds of water, they would see how instantaneous is its effect. One writer on this subject says that once he was suffering from chronic indigestion, and, all remedies proving futile, he had grown emaciated, but the application of the enema at once restored him his appetite and altogether cured him of his complaint in a few days. Even ailments like jaundice can be cured by the application of the enema. If the enema has to be frequently employed, cold water should be used, for the repeated use of hot water is likely to enfeeble the constitution. Dr. Louis Kuhne of Germany has, after repeated experiments, arrived at the conclusion that water cure is the best for all diseases. His books on this subject are so popular that they are now available in almost all the languages of the world, including those of India. He contends that the abdomen is the seat of all diseases. When there is too much heat in the abdomen, it manifests itself in the form of fever, rheumatism, eruptions on the body, and the like. The efficacy of water cure had indeed been recognized by several people long before Kuhne, but it was he who for the first time pointed out the common origin of all diseases. His views need not be accepted by us in their entirety, but it is an undoubted fact that his principles and methods have proved effective in many diseases. To give only one instance out of many that have come within my experience, in a bad case of rheumatism, a thorough cure was effected by Kuhne's system, after all other remedies had been tried and had proved utterly ineffectual. Dr. Kuhne holds that the heat in the abdomen abates by the application of cold water, and has therefore prescribed the bathing of the abdomen and the surrounding parts with thoroughly cold water. And for the greater convenience of bathing, he has devised a special kind of tin bath. This, however, is not quite indispensable. The tin tubs of an oval shape and of different sizes to suit people of different heights, available in our bazaars, will do equally well. The tub should be filled 3/4 with cold water, and the patient should seat himself in it in such a fashion that his feet and the upper part of the body remain outside the water, and the rest of the body up to the hips inside it. The feet may preferably be placed on a low footstool. The patient should sit in the water quite naked, but if he feels cold, the feet and the upper part of the body should be covered with a blanket. If a shirt is worn, it should be kept entirely outside the water. The bath should be taken in a room where there is plenty of fresh air and light. The patient should then slowly rub, or cause to be rubbed, the abdomen with a small rough towel from 5 to 30 minutes or more. the effect is instantly felt in most cases. In cases of rheumatism, the wind in the stomach escapes in the form of eructations and the like, and in cases of fever, the thermometer falls by 1 or 2 degrees. The bowels are readily cleaned by this process, fatigue disappears, sleeplessness is removed, and extreme drowsiness gives place to vigor. This contrariness of result is more apparent than real. For want of sleep and the excess of it are both brought on by the same cause. So too dysentery and constipation, which are both the outcome of indigestion, are cured by this method. Piles of long standing can also be got rid of by this bath with proper regulation of diet. Those who are troubled by the necessity of constant spitting should at once resort to this treatment for a cure. By its means the weak can become strong, and even chronic rheumatism has been cured by it. It is also an effective remedy for hemorrhages, headaches, and blood poisoning. Kuhne prescribes it as an invaluable remedy even for diseases like the cancer. A pregnant woman who takes to it regularly will have an easy childbirth. In short, all persons, without distinction of age or sex, can take to it with advantage. There is another kind of bath, known as the wet sheet pack, which is an unfailing remedy for various diseases. This bath is taken in the following manner. A table or chair is placed in the open air big enough to allow of the patient lying on it at full length. On it are spread, hanging on either side, some 4 blankets, less or more according to the state of the weather. Over them are spread 2 white thick sheets well dipped in cold water, and a pillow is placed under the blankets at one end. Then the patient is stripped naked, with the exception of a small waistcloth, if he so wishes, and made to lie down on the sheets, with his hands placed in the armpits. Then the sheets and blankets are, one after another, wrapped round his body, taking care that the parts hanging under the feet are well tucked in, so as to cover them. If the patient is exposed to the sun, a wet cloth is put over his head and face, keeping the nose always open. At first the patient will experience some shivering, but this will soon give place to an agreeably warm sensation. He can lie in this position from 5 minutes to an hour or more. After a time he begins to perspire, or at times falls asleep. Soon after coming out of the sheets he should bathe in cold water. This is an excellent remedy for smallpox and fever and skin diseases like the itch, the ringworm, and pimples and blotches. Even the worst forms of chickenpox and smallpox are completely cured by this process. People can easily learn to take the wet sheet pack themselves and to apply it to others, and can thus see for themselves its wonderful effect. As the whole dirt of the body sticks to the sheets in the process of taking this bath, they ought not be used again without being well washed in boiling water. Needless to say, the full benefit of these baths cannot be derived unless the rules already mentioned as to diet, exercise, and the like are strictly observed. If a rheumatic patient, for instance, were to take to Kuhne's bath or to the wet sheet pack, while eating unwholesome food, living in impure air, and neglecting his exercise, how can he possibly derive any good out of it? It is only when accompanied by strict observance of all the laws of health that water cure can be of any effect, and when so employed, its effects are sure and immediate. End of chapter 2. Part 2, Chapter 3 of A Guide to Health. The Use of Earth. We will now proceed to describe the curative properties of earth, which are in some cases even more remarkable than those of water. That earth should have such properties need not cause us any surprise, for our own body is compounded of the earthly element. Indeed, we do make use of earth as a purifying agent. We wash the ground with earth to remove bad smells. We put it over decaying matter to prevent the pollution of the air. We wash our hands with it, and even employ it to clean the private parts. Yogis besmear their bodies with it. Some people use it as a cure for boils and ulcers, and dead bodies are buried in the earth so that they may not vitiate the atmosphere. All this allows that earth has many valuable properties as a purifying and curative agent. Just as Dr. Kuhne has devoted special attention to the subject of water cure, another German doctor has made a special study of earth and its properties. He goes so far as to say that it can be used with success in the treatment of even the most complicated diseases. He says that once in a case of snake bite, where everybody else had given up the man for dead, he restored him to life by causing him to be covered up with earth for some time. There is no reason to doubt the veracity of this report. It is well known that the great heat is generated in the body by burying it in the earth, and although we cannot explain how exactly the effect is produced, it is undeniable that earth does possess the property of absorbing the poison. Indeed, every case of snakebite may not be cured in this way, but it should certainly be tried in every case. And I can say from my own experience that in cases of scorpion sting and the like, the use of mud is particularly beneficial. I have myself tried with success the following forms of earth cure. Constipation, dysentery, and chronic stomachache have been cured by the use of a mud poultice over the abdomen for 2 or 3 days. Instant relief has been obtained in cases of headache by applying a mud bandage round the head. Sore eye has also been cured by the same method. Hurts of all kinds, whether accompanied by inflammation or not, have been healed likewise. In the old days I could not keep well without a regular use of Enno's fruit salt and the like, but since 1904, when I learnt the value of earth cure, I have had not a single occasion to use them. A mud poultice over the abdomen and the head gives distinct relief in a state of high fever. Skin diseases like the itch, the ringworm, and boils have been cured with the use of mud, though no doubt ulcers from which pus issues are not so easily cured. Burns and scalds are likewise healed by mud, which also prevents inflammation. Piles, too, are cured by the same treatment. When the hands and feet become red and swollen owing to frost, mud is an unfailing remedy, and pain in the joints is also relieved by it. From these and other experiments in mud cure, I have come to the conclusion that earth is an invaluable element in the domestic treatment of diseases. All kinds of earth are not, of course, equally beneficial. Dry earth, dug out from a clean spot, has been found the most effective. It should not be too sticky. Mud, which is midway between sand and clay, is the best. It should, of course, be free from cow dung and other rubbish. It should be well sifted in a fine sieve, and then soaked in cold water to the consistency of well-kneaded dough before use. Then it should be tied up in a piece of clean, unstarched cloth, and used in the form of a thick poultice. The poultice should be removed before the mud begins to dry up. Ordinarily, it will last from 2 to 3 hours. Mud, once used, should never be used again, but a cloth, once used, can be used again after being well washed, provided it is free from blood and other dirty matter. If the poultice has to be applied to the abdomen, it should first be covered over with a warm cloth. Everybody should keep a tinful of earth ready for use, so as not to have to hunt for it whenever an occasion arises for its use. Otherwise, much precious time may be wasted in cases, as of scorpion sting, where delay would be dangerous. End of chapter 3.
Part 2, Chapter 4 of A Guide to Health, Fever and its Cure. We now pass on to consider some particular diseases and the means of curing them. And first, fever. We generally apply the term fever to a condition of heat in the body, but English doctors have distinguished many varieties of this disease, each with its own system of treatment. But following the common practice and the principles elaborated in these chapters, we may say that all fevers can be cured in one and the same manner.
I have tried this single treatment for all varieties from simple fever up to bubonic plague with invariably satisfactory results.
In 1904, there was a severe outbreak of plague among the Indians in South Africa. It was so severe that out of 23 persons that were affected, as many as 21 died within the space of 24 hours, and of the remaining 2 who were removed to the hospital, only 1 survived, and that one was the man to whom was applied the mud poultice. We cannot, of course, conclude from this that it was the mud poultice that saved him, but in any case, it is undeniable that it did him no harm. They were both suffering from high fever brought on by inflammation of the lungs and had been rendered unconscious. The man on whom was tried the mud poultice was so bad that he was spitting blood, and I afterwards learned from the doctor that he had been insufficiently fed on milk alone. As most fevers are caused by disorders of the bowels, the very first thing to do is to starve the patient. It is a mere superstition that a weak man will get weaker by starving. As we have already seen, only that portion of our food is really useful which is assimilated into the blood, and the remainder only clogs the bowels. In fever, the digestive organs are very weak, the tongue gets coated and the lips are hard and dry. If any food is given to the patient in this condition, it will remain undigested and aid the fever. Starving the patient gives his digestive organs time to perform their work, hence the need to starve him for a day or 2. At the same time, he should take at least 2 baths every day according to the Kuhne's system. If he is too weak or ill to bathe, a mud poultice should be applied to his abdomen. If the head aches or feels too hot, a poultice should also be applied to the head. The patient should as far as possible be placed in the open air and should be well covered. At meal time, he should be given the juice of lime well filtered and mixed with cold or boiling water, and if possible without any sugar. This has a very beneficial effect and should alone be given if the patient's teeth can bear its sourness. Afterwards, he may be given a half or the whole of a plantain well mixed with a spoon of olive oil mixed with a spoon of lime juice. If he feels thirsty, he should be given water boiled or cooled or the juice of lime, never unboiled water. His clothes should be as few as possible and should be frequently changed. Even persons suffering from typhoid and the like diseases have been completely cured by this simple treatment and are enjoying perfect health at present. A seemingly cure may also be effected by quinine, but it really brings other diseases in its train. Even in malarial fever, in which quinine is supposed to be most effective, I have rarely seen it bring permanent relief. On the other hand, I have actually seen several cases of malarial patients being permanently cured by the treatment described above. Many people subsist on milk alone during fever, but my experience is that it really does harm in the initial stages as it is hard to digest. If milk has to be given, it is best given in the form of wheat coffee or with a small quantity of rice flour well boiled in water, but in extreme forms of fever, it ought not to be given at all. In such a condition, the juice of lime may always be given with great success. As soon as the tongue gets clean, plantain may be included in the diet and given in the form described above. If there be constipation, a hot water enema with borax should be applied in preference to purgatives, after which a diet of olive oil will serve to keep the bowels free. End of Fever and its Cures. Part 2, Chapter 5 of A Guide to Health. Constipation, Dysentery, Gripes and Piles. It may at first sight appear strange to have 4 different ailments put together in this chapter. But as a matter of fact, they are all so closely connected and may be cured more or less in the same way. When the stomach gets clogged by undigested matter, it leads to one or other of these diseases according to the varying constitutions of individuals. In some it produces constipation. The bowels do not move or move only partly, and there is a great straining at stools until it results in bleeding or at times in the discharge of mucus or piles. In others it leads to diarrhea, which often ends in dysentery. In others again, it may give rise to gripes accompanied by pain in the stomach and the discharge of mucus. In all these cases, the patient loses his appetite, his body gets pale and weak, his tongue gets coated, and his breath foul. Many also suffer from headache and other complaints. Constipation indeed is so common that hundreds of pills and powders have been invented to cure it. The chief function of such patent medicines as Mother's Seagull syrup and Eno's fruit salt is to relieve constipation, and hence thousands of people go in for them in the vain hope of being cured for good. Any Vaid or Hakim will tell you the constipation and the like are the result of indigestion, and that the best way to cure them is to remove the causes of indigestion, but the more candid among them will confess that they are forced to manufacture pills and powders since the patients are not really prepared to renounce their bad habits, but at the same time want to get cured. Indeed, the present-day advertisements of such medicines go to the extent of promising to those that would buy them that they need observe no directions as to diet and the like, but may eat and drink whatever they like. But my readers need not be told that this is a mere string of lies. All purgatives are invariably injurious to health. Even the mildest of them, even if they relieve the constipation, give rise to other forms of disease. If they should do any good at all, the patient should thoroughly change his way of life so as not to have to turn to purgatives again. Otherwise, there can be no doubt that they must give rise to new diseases, even supposing that they serve to get rid of the old. The first thing to do in cases of constipation and the like is to reduce the quantity of food, especially such heavy things as ghee, sugar, and cream of milk. Of course, he should eschew altogether wine, tobacco, bhang, tea, coffee, cocoa, and loaves made of milk flour. The diet should consist for the most part of fresh fruits with olive oil. The patient should be made to starve for 36 hours before treatment begins. During this time and after, mud poultices should be applied to the abdomen during sleep, and as has been already said, 1 or 2 kune baths should also be given. The patient should be made to walk for at least 2 hours every day. I have myself seen severe cases of constipation, dysentery, piles and grips effectively cured by this simple treatment. Piles may not, of course, completely disappear, but they will certainly cease to give trouble. The sufferer from grips should take special care not to take any food except lime juice in hot water, so long as there is discharge of blood or mucus. If there is excessive gripping pain in the stomach, it can be cured by warming with a bottle of hot water or a piece of well-heated brick. Needless to say, the patient should live constantly in the open air. Fruits like the French plum, the raisin, the orange and the grape are particularly useful in constipation. This does not, of course, mean that these fruits may be eaten even when there is no hunger. They ought not to be eaten at all cases of gripes accompanied by a bad taste in the mouth. End of Constipation, Dysentery, Gripes and Piles. Part 2, Chapter 6 of A Guide to Health. Contagious Diseases. Smallpox. Now we will proceed to deal with the treatment of contagious diseases. They have a common origin, but since smallpox is by far the most important of them, we will give a separate chapter to it, dealing with the rest in another chapter. We are all terribly afraid of the smallpox and have very crude notions about it. We in India even worship it as a deity. In fact, it is caused, just like other diseases, by the blood getting impure owing to some disorder of the bowels, and the poison that accumulates in the system is expelled in the form of smallpox. If this view is correct, then there is absolutely no need to be afraid of smallpox. If it were really a contagious disease, everyone should catch it by merely touching the patient. But this is not always the case. Hence, there is really no harm in touching the patient, provided we take some essential precautions in doing so. We cannot, of course, assert the smallpox is never transmitted by touch, for those that are physically in a condition favorable to its transmission will catch it. This is why, in a locality where smallpox has appeared, many people are found attacked by it at the same time. This has given rise to the superstition that it is a contagious disease, and hence to attempt to mislead the people into the belief that vaccination is an effective means of preventing it. The process of vaccination consists in injecting into the skin the liquid that is obtained by applying the discharge from the body of a smallpox patient to the udder of a cow. The original theory was that a single vaccination would suffice to keep a man immune from this disease for life. But when it was found that even vaccinated persons were attacked by the disease, a new theory came into being that the vaccination should be renewed after a certain period, and today it has become the rule for all persons, whether already vaccinated or not, to get themselves vaccinated whenever smallpox rages as an epidemic in any locality, so that it is no uncommon thing to come across people who have been vaccinated 5 or 6 times or even more. Vaccination is a barbarous practice, and it is one of the most fatal of all the delusions current in our time, not to be found even among the so-called savage races of the world. Its supporters are not content with its adoption by those who have no objection to it, but seek to impose it with the aid of penal laws and rigorous punishments on all people alike. The practice of vaccination is not very old, dating as it does only from 1798 AD. But during this comparatively short period that has elapsed, millions have fallen a prey to the delusion that those who get themselves vaccinated are safe from the attack of smallpox. No one can say that smallpox will necessarily attack those who have not been vaccinated, for many cases have been observed of unvaccinated people being free from its attack. From the fact that some people who are not vaccinated do get the disease, we cannot of course conclude that they would have been immune if only they had got themselves vaccinated. Moreover, vaccination is a very dirty process, for the serum which is introduced into the human body includes not only that of the cow but also of the actual smallpox patient. An average man would even vomit at the mere sight of this stuff. If the hand happens to touch it, it is always washed with soap. The mere suggestion of tasting it fills us with indignation and disgust. But how few of those who get themselves vaccinated realize that they are in effect eating this filthy stuff. Most people know that in several diseases, medicines and liquid food are injected into the blood and that they are assimilated into the system more rapidly than if they were taken through the mouth. The only difference, in fact, between injection and the ordinary process of eating through the mouth is that the assimilation in the former case is instantaneous, while that in the latter is slow. And yet we do not shrink from getting ourselves vaccinated. As has been well said, cowards die a living death, and our craze for vaccination is solely due to the fear of death or disfigurement by smallpox. I cannot also help feeling that vaccination is a violation of the dictates of religion and morality. The drinking of the blood of even dead animals is looked upon with horror even by habitual meat-eaters. Yet, what is vaccination but the taking in of the poisoned blood of an innocent living animal? Better far were it for God-fearing men that they should 1,000 times become the victims of smallpox and even die a terrible death than that they should be guilty of such an act of sacrilege. Several of the most thoughtful men in England have laboriously investigated the manifold evils of vaccination, and an anti-vaccination society has also been formed there. The members of this society have declared open war against vaccination, and many have even gone to gaol for this cause. Their objections to vaccination are briefly as follows. 1. The preparation of vaccine from the udder of cows or calves entails untold suffering on thousands of innocent creatures, and this cannot possibly be justified by any gains resulting from vaccination. 2. Vaccination, instead of doing good, works considerable mischief by giving rise to many new diseases. Even its advocates cannot deny that, after its introduction, many new diseases have come into being. 3. The vaccine that is prepared from the blood of a smallpox patient is likely to contain and transmit the germs of all the several diseases that he may be suffering from. 4. There is no guarantee that smallpox will not attack the vaccinated. Dr. Jenner, the inventor of vaccination, originally supposed that perfect immunity could be secured by a single injection on a single arm. But when it was found to fail, it was asserted that vaccination on both the arms would serve the purpose. And when even this proved ineffectual, it came to be held that both the arms should be vaccinated at more than one place, and that it should also be renewed once in 7 years. Finally, the period of immunity has further been reduced to 3 years. All this clearly shows that doctors themselves have no definite views on the matter. The truth is, as we have already said, that there is no saying that smallpox will not attack the vaccinated, or that all cases of immunity must needs be due to vaccination. 5. The vaccination is a filthy substance, and it is foolish to expect that one kind of filth can be removed by another. By these and similar arguments, This society has already produced a large volume of public opinion against vaccination. In a certain town, for instance, a large proportion of the people refuse to be vaccinated, and yet statistics prove that they are singularly free from disease. The fact of the matter is that it is only the self-interest of doctors that stands in the way of the abolition of this inhuman practice, for the fear of losing the large incomes that they at present derive from this source blinds them to the countless evils which it brings. There are, however, a few doctors who recognize these evils and who are determined opponents of vaccination. Those who are conscientious objectors to vaccination should, of course, have the courage to face all penalties and persecutions to which they may be subjected by law and stand alone, if need be, against the whole world in defense of their conviction. Those who object to it merely on the grounds of health should acquire a complete mastery of the subject and should be able to convince others of the correctness of their views and convert them into adopting those views in practice. But those who have neither definite views on the subject nor courage enough to stand up for their convictions should no doubt obey the laws of the state and shape their conduct in deference to the opinions and practices of the world around them. Those who object to vaccination should observe all the more strictly the laws of health already explained, for the strict observance of these laws ensures in the system those vital forces which counteract all disease germs and is therefore the best protection against smallpox as well as other diseases. If, while objecting to the introduction of the poisonous vaccine into the system, they surrendered themselves to the still more fatal poison of sensuality, they would undoubtedly forfeit their right to ask the world to accept their views on the matter. When smallpox has actually appeared, the best treatment is the wet sheet pack, which should be applied 3 times a day. It relieves the fever and the sores heal rapidly. There is no need at all to apply oils or ointments on the sores. If possible, a mud poultice should be applied in 1 or 2 places. The diet should consist of rice and light fresh fruits, all rich fruits like date and almond being avoided. Normally, the sores should begin to heal under the wet sheet pack in less than a week. If they do not, it means that the poison in the system has not been completely expelled. Instead of looking upon smallpox as a terrible disease, we should regard it as one of the nature's best experiments for getting rid of the accumulated poison in the body and the restoration of normal health. After an attack of smallpox, the patient remains weak for some time and in some cases even suffers from other ailments. But this is due not to the smallpox itself, but to the wrong remedies employed to cure it. Thus, the use of quinine in fever often results in deafness and even leads to extreme form of it known as quininism. So too, the employment of mercury in venereal diseases leads to many new forms of disease. Then again, too frequent use of purgatives in constipation brings on ailments like the piles. The only sound system of treatment is that which attempts to remove the root causes of disease by a strict observance of the fundamental laws of health. Even the costly bhasmas, which are supposed to be unfailing remedies for such diseases, are in effect highly injurious, for although they may seem to do some good, they excite the evil passions and ultimately ruin the health. After the vesicles on the body have given place to scabs, olive oil should be constantly applied and the patient bathed every day. Then the scabs rapidly fall off and even the pox soon disappear, the skin recovering its normal color and freshness. End of Contagious Diseases. Smallpox. Part 2, Chapter 7 of A Guide to Health. Other Contagious Diseases. We do not dread chickenpox so much as its elder sister, since it is not so fatal and does not cause disfigurement and the like. It is, however, exactly the same as smallpox in other respects and should therefore be dealt with in the same way. Bubonic plague is a terrible disease and has accounted for the death of millions of our people since the year 1896, when it first made its real entry into our land. The doctors, in spite of all their investigations, have not been able to invent a sure remedy for it. Nowadays, the practice of inoculation has come into vogue and the belief has gained ground that an attack of plague may be obviated by it. But inoculation for plague is as bad and as sinful as vaccination for smallpox. Although no sure remedy has been devised for this disease, we will venture to suggest the following treatment to those who have full faith in Providence and who are not afraid of death. 1. The wet sheet pack should be applied as soon as the first symptoms of fever appear. 2. A thick mud poultice should be applied to the bubo. 3. The patient should be completely starved. 4. If he feels thirsty, he should be given lime juice in cold water. 5. He should be made to lie in the open air. 6. There should not be more than one attendant by the side of the patient. We can confidently assert that if plague can be cured by any treatment at all, it can be cured by this. Though the exact origin and causes of plague are yet unknown, it is undoubted that rats have something to do with its communication. We should therefore take all precautions in a plague-infected area to prevent the approach of rats in our dwellings. If we cannot get rid of them, we should vacate the house. The best remedy to prevent an attack of plague is, of course, to follow strictly the laws of health, to live in the open air, to eat plain wholesome food and in moderation, to take good exercise, to keep the house neat and clean, to avoid all evil habits, and in short, lead a life of utter simplicity and purity. Even in normal times, our lives should be such, but in times of plague and other epidemics, we should be doubly careful. Pneumonic plague is an even more dangerous form of this disease. Its attack is sudden and almost invariably fatal. The patient has very high fever, feels extremely difficult in breathing, and in most cases is rendered unconscious. This form of plague broke out in Johannesburg in 1904, and as has been already said, only one man escaped alive out of the 23 who were attacked. The treatment for this disease is just the same as that for bubonic plague, with this difference that the poultice should be applied in this case to both sides of the chest. If there be no time to try the wet sheet pack, a thin poultice of mud should be applied to the head. Needless to say, here as in other cases, prevention is better than cure. We are terribly afraid of cholera as a plague, but in fact it is much less fatal. Here the wet sheet pack, however, is of no effect, but the mud poultice should be applied to the stomach. And where there is a tingling sensation, the affected part should be warmed with a bottle filled with warm water. The feet should be rubbed with mustard oil and the patient should be starved. Care should be taken to see that he does not get alarmed. If the motions are too frequent, the patient should not be repeatedly taken out of bed, but a flat, shallow vessel should be placed underneath to receive the stools. If these precautions are taken in due time, there is little fear of danger. This disease generally breaks out in the hot season, when we generally eat all sorts of unripe and overripe fruits in immoderate quantities in addition to our ordinary food. The water also that we drink during this season is often dirty, as the quantity of it in wells and tanks is small, and we take no trouble to boil or filter it. Then again, the stools of the patients being allowed to lie exposed, the germs of the disease are communicated through the air. Indeed, what we consider how little heed we pay to these most elementary facts and principles, we can only wonder that we are not more often attacked by these terrible diseases. During the prevalence of cholera, we should eat light food in moderation. We should breathe plenty of fresh air, and the water that we drink should always be thoroughly boiled and filtered with a thick, clean piece of cloth. The stools of the patient should be covered up with a thick layer of earth. Indeed, even in normal times, we should invariably cover up the tools with ashes or loose earth. If we do so, there would be much less danger of the spread of disease. Even the lower animals like the cat take this precaution, but we are worse than they in this respect. It should also be thoroughly impressed on the minds of persons suffering from contagious diseases, as well as those around them, that they should under no circumstances give way to panic, for fear always paralyzes the nerves and increases the danger of fatality. End of Chapter 7.
Part 2, Chapter 8, of A Guide to Health. Maternity and Childbirth. Our object in the foregoing chapters has been to point out the unity of origin and treatment of some of the more common diseases. We are indeed fully aware that those who are the constant victims of disease, and who are constantly oppressed by the fear of death, will still continue to put themselves at the mercy of doctors in spite of all that we might say against it. We venture to think, however, that there would be at least a few who are willing to cure themselves of their diseases by purely natural processes, so as to save themselves from all further attacks, and such persons would surely find it worthwhile to follow the simple directions we have given. Before concluding this book, we will also give a few hints on maternity and the care of the child, as well as some common accidents. In the lower orders of the animal creation, the pangs of childbirth are altogether unknown. The same should really be the case with perfectly healthy women. In fact, most women in the country regard childbirth as quite an ordinary matter. They continue to do their normal work till almost the last moment, and experience hardly any pain at the time of delivery. Women employed in labor have also been known to be able very often to return to work almost immediately after childbirth. How comes it, then, that women in towns and cities have to endure so much pain and suffering at the time of childbirth? And why is it that they have to receive special treatment before and after the delivery? The answer is simple and obvious. The women in towns have to lead an unnatural life. Their food, their costume, their mode of life in general offend against the natural laws of healthy living. Further, besides becoming pregnant at a premature age, they are the sad victims of men's lust even after pregnancy, as well as immediately after childbirth, so that conception again takes place at too short an interval. This is the state of the utter misery and wretchedness in which lakhs of our young girls and women find themselves in our country today. To my mind, life under such conditions is little removed from the tortures of hell. So long as men continue to behave so monstrously, there can be no hope of happiness for our women. Many men put the blame on the women's shoulders, but it is none of our business here to weigh the relative guilt of man and woman in this matter. We are only concerned to recognize the existence of the evil and to point out its cure. Let all married people realize, once for all, that so long as sexual enjoyment at a premature age, as well as during pregnancy and soon after childbirth, does not cease to exist in our land, an easy and painless childbirth must remain a wild dream. Women silently endure the pangs of childbirth, as well as the subsequent period of confinement, under the wrong notion that they are inevitable, but they fail to see how their own ignorance and weakness of will make their children grow weaker and droop from day to day. It is the clear duty of every man and woman to try to avert this calamity at any cost. If even a single man and woman should do their duty in this matter, to that extent it would mean the elevation of the world. And this is clearly a matter in which no man need or should wait for another's example. It follows, then, that the very first duty of the husband is wholly to abstain from all sexual intercourse with the wife from the moment of conception. And great is the responsibility that rests on the wife during the 9 months that follow. She should be made to realize that the character of the child to be born will depend entirely on her life and conduct during this sacred period. If she fills her mind with love for all things that are good and noble, the child will also manifest the same disposition. If, on the other hand, she gives way to anger and other evil passions, her child will necessarily inherit the same. Hence, in these 9 months she should engage herself constantly in good works, free her mind from all fear and worry, give no room for any evil thoughts or feelings, keep out all untruth from her life, and waste not a moment in idle talk or deed. The child that is born of such a mother, how can it help being noble and strong? The pregnant woman should, of course, keep her body as pure as her mind. She should breathe plenty of fresh air, and eat only so much of plain and wholesome food as she can easily digest. If she attends to all the directions already given in the matter of diet, etc., she would have no need at all to seek the aid of doctors. If she suffers from constipation, the proportion of olive oil in the diet should be increased, and in cases of nausea or vomiting, she should take a juice of a lime in water without sugar. All spices and condiments should be scrupulously avoided. The yearning for various new things that attends a woman in pregnancy may be restrained by the use of kuna baths. This is also useful in increasing her strength and vitality and in easing the pains of childbirth. It is also necessary to steel her mind against such yearnings by nipping in the bud each desire as it comes. The parents should be constantly mindful of the welfare of the child in the womb. It is also the husband's duty during this period to refrain from all wranglings with his wife, and to conduct himself in such a way as to make her cheerful and happy. She should be relieved of the heavier duties of household management, and made to walk for some time every day in fresh air. And on no account should she be given any drugs or medicines during the period. End of Part 2, Chapter 8. Part 2, Chapter 9 of A Guide to Health. Care of the Child. We do not propose in this chapter to describe the duties of a midwife or wet nurse, but only to point out how the child should be cared for after birth. Those who have read the foregoing chapters need not be told how injurious it is to keep the mother, during the period of confinement, in a dark and ill-ventilated closet, and to make her lie on a dirty bed with a fire underneath. These practices, however time-honored they may be, are nevertheless fraught with dangerous consequences. No doubt, during the cold season the mother should be kept warm, but this is best done by using good blankets. If the apartment is too cold and a fire has to be kept, it must be lighted outside and only brought in when all the smoke has disappeared, and even then it should not be kept under the cot in which she lies. Warmth may also be given by keeping bottles of hot water on the bed. All the clothes and sheets should be thoroughly cleansed after childbirth and before being used again. As the health of the child will depend entirely on that of the mother, special attention must be paid to her diet and mode of living. If she is fed on wheat, with plenty of good fruits, like the plantain, and olive oil, she would feel warm and strong and have plenty of milk. Olive oil gives aperient properties to the mother's milk, and thus serves to keep the child free from constipation. If the child is unwell, attention must be turned to the state of the mother's health. Administering drugs to the child is as good as murdering it, for the child, with its delicate constitution, easily succumbs to their poisonous effects. Hence, the medicine should be administered to the mother, so that its beneficial properties may be transmitted to the child through her milk. If the child suffers, as it often does, from cough or loose bowels, there is no cause for alarm. We should wait for a day or so and try to get at the root of the trouble, and then remove it. Making fuss over it and falling into a panic only makes matters worse. The child should invariably be bathed in tepid water. Its clothing should be as little as possible. For a few months it is best to have none at all. The child should be laid on a thin, soft, white sheet and covered with a warm cloth. This will obviate the need for the use of shirts, prevent the clothes from getting dirty, and make the child hardy and strong. A fine piece of cloth folded into 4 should be placed over the navel string and kept in position by a band over it. The practice of tying a thread to the navel string and hanging it round the neck is highly injurious. The navel band should be kept loose. If the part round the navel be moist, fine, well-sifted flour may be gently applied over it. As long as the supply of the mother's milk is sufficient, the child should be fed exclusively on it, but when it gets insufficient, fried wheat well powdered and mixed with hot water and a little of jaggery may be used as a substitute with quite good results. Half a plantain well mashed and mixed with half a spoonful of olive oil is also particularly beneficial. If cow's milk has to be given, it should at first be mixed with water in the proportion of 3 to 1, and then heated until it just begins to boil, when a little of pure jaggery should also be added. The use of sugar instead of jaggery is harmful. The child should gradually be accustomed to a fruit diet so that its blood may be kept pure from the very beginning, and it may grow manly and bright. Those mothers who begin to feed their children on things like rice, vegetables, and dal, as soon as or even before its teeth have appeared, are doing them infinite harm. Needless to say, coffee and tea should be strictly eschewed. When the child has grown big enough to walk, it may be clothed with kurta and the like, but its feet should still be kept bare, so that it may be free to roam about at will. The use of shoes prevents the free circulation of blood and the development of hardy feet and legs. Dressing the child in silk or lace cloths with cap and coat and ornaments is a barbarous practice. Our attempt to enhance by such ridiculous means the beauty that nature has given only bespeaks our vanity and ignorance. We should always remember that the education of the child really begins from its very birth, and is best given by the parents themselves. The use of threats and punishments and the practice of gorging the children with food are an outrage on the principles of true education. As the old saying has it, like parent, like child. Hence, the example and practice of the parents necessarily shape the conduct and character of the children. If they are weaklings, their children also grow up weak and delicate. If they talk clearly and distinctly, so too will the children, but if they talk with a lisp, the children will also learn to do so. If they use foul language or are addicted to bad habits, the children necessarily imitate them and develop into bad characters. In fact, there is no field of human activity in which the child does not imitate the example of its parents. We see, then, how heavy is the responsibility that rests on the shoulders of the parents. The very first duty of a man is to give such education to his children as will make them honest and truthful, and an ornament to the society in which they live. In the animal and vegetable kingdoms, the offspring invariably takes after the parent. Man alone has violated this law of nature. It is only among men that we see such incongruities as vicious children being born to virtuous parents, or sickly ones to the healthy. This is due to the fact that we thoughtlessly become parents when we are not mature enough to assume the responsibilities of that position. It is the solemn duty of all virtuous parents to train their children in noble ways. This requires that both the father and the mother should themselves have received a sound education. Where the parents lack such education and are aware of their imperfections, it is their duty to entrust their children to the care of proper guardians. It is foolish to expect that a high character can be developed in the children by merely sending them to school. Where the training given at school is inconsistent with that given at home, there can be no hope of improvement for the child. As already pointed out, the true education of the child begins from the very moment of its birth. The rudiments of knowledge are imbibed almost in the course of play. This indeed was the ancient tradition. The practice of sending children to school is a growth of yesterday. If only the parents would do their duty by their children, there would be no limit to the possibilities of their advancement. But, in fact, we make playthings of our children. We deck their persons with fine clothes and jewels, we gorge them with sweetmeats, and spoil them from their very infancy by fondlings and caresses. We let them go unchecked on their way in our false affection for them. Being ourselves miserly, sensuous, dishonest, slothful, and uncleanly, is it to be wondered at that our children should follow in our footsteps and turn out weak and vicious, selfish and slothful, sensuous and immoral? Let all thoughtful parents ponder well over these matters, for on them depends the future of our land. End of Part 2, Chapter 9.
Part 2, Chapter 10 of A Guide to Health. Some accidents. Drowning. We will now turn our attention to some of the more common accidents and the methods of dealing with them. A knowledge of these things is essential to everybody so that timely help may be rendered and the loss of many precious lives averted. Even children should be taught to deal with these cases, as in that way they are more likely to grow up kind and thoughtful citizens. And first we will deal with drowning. As man cannot live without air for more than 5 minutes at the most, little life generally remains in a drowning man taken out of water. Immediate steps should therefore be taken to bring him back to life. Two things have specially to be done for these: artificial respiration and the application of warmth. We should not forget that very often such first aid has to be rendered by the side of tanks and rivers where all the needed materials are not easily available, and such aid can be most effectual only when there are at least 2 or 3 men on the spot. The first aider should also possess the qualities of resourcefulness, patience and briskness. If he himself loses his presence of mind, he can do nothing. So too, if the attendants begin to discuss methods or quarrel over details, there is no hope for the man. The best one in the party should lead, and the others should implicitly follow his directions. As soon as the man is taken out of water, his wet clothes should be removed and his body wiped dry. Then he should be made to lie on his face with his hands under the head. Then with a hand on his chest, we should remove from his mouth the water and dirt that might have got in. At this time his tongue would have come out of his mouth, when it should be caught hold with a kerchief and held till consciousness return. Then he should at once be turned over with the head and the chest a little raised above the feet. Then one of the attendants should kneel by his head and slowly spread out and straighten his arms on either side. By this means his ribs will be raised and the air outside can enter into his body. Then his hands should be quickly brought back and folded on his chest, so that the chest may contract and the air be expelled. In addition to this, hot and cold water should be taken in the hands and poured on his chest. If a fire can be lighted or procured, the man should be warmed with it. Then all the available clothes should be wrapped round his body, which should be thoroughly rubbed for warmth. All this should be tried for a long time without losing hope. In some cases, such methods have to be applied for several hours on end before breathing is restored. As soon as signs of consciousness appear, some hot drink should be administered. The juice of lime in hot water or decoction of cloves, pepper and the bark of the bay tree will be found specially effective. The smell of tobacco may also prove useful. People should not be allowed to crowd round the patient and obstruct the free passage of air. The signs of death in such cases are the following: the complete cessation of breathing and the beating of heart and lungs as indicated by a piece of peacock feather held near the nose remaining quite steady, or a mirror held near the mouth being undimmed by the moisture in the breath, the eyes remaining fixed and half open, with heavy eyelids, the jaws getting fixed, the fingers getting crooked, the tongue protruding between the teeth, the mouth getting frothy, nose getting red, the whole body turning pale. If all these signs simultaneously appear, we may conclude that the man is dead. In some rare cases, life may still remain even when all these signs are present. The only conclusive test of death is the setting in of decomposition. Hence, the patient should never be given up for lost until after a long and patient application of remedial measures. End of Chapter 10. Part 2, Chapter 11 of A Guide to Health. Some accidents continued. Burns and scalds. Very often when a man's clothes catch fire, we get into a panic and instead of helping the injured, make matters worse by our ignorance. It is our duty therefore to know exactly what to do in such cases. The person whose clothes have caught fire should not lose his presence of mind. If the fire is only at one edge of the cloth, it should at once be squeezed out with the hands. But if it has spread over the whole cloth or a large portion of it, the man should at once lie down and roll on the floor. If a thick cloth like a carpet be available, it should at once be wrapped round his body, and if water is at hand, it should also be poured over it. As soon as the fire has been put out, we should find out if there are burns in any part of the body. The cloth would generally stick to the body where there are burns, in which case it should not be forcibly torn off, but gently snipped off with a pair of scissors, leaving the affected parts undisturbed, and taking care to see that the skin does not come off. Immediately after this, poultices of pure mud should be applied to all these places and kept in position by bandages. This will instantly relieve the burning and ease the patient's suffering. The poultices may as well be applied over the portions of the cloth which stick onto the body. They should be renewed as soon as they begin to get dry. There is no reason to fear the touch of cold water. Where this sort of first aid has not been rendered, the following directions will be found very useful. Fresh plantain leaves, well smeared with olive or sweet oil, should be applied over the burns. If plantain leaves are not available, pieces of cloth may be used. A mixture of linseed oil and lime water in equal proportions may also be applied with great advantage. The portions of cloth which adhere to the burns may be easily removed by moistening them with a mixture of tepid milk and water. The first bandage of oil should be removed after 2 days and afterwards fresh bandages applied every day. If blisters have formed on the burnt surface, they should be pricked, but the skin need not necessarily be removed. If the skin has simply got red by the burn, there is no more effective remedy than the application of a mud poultice. If the fingers have been burned, care should be taken, when the poultice is applied, that they do not touch against one another. This same treatment may be applied in cases of acid burns and scalds of every description. End of Chapter 11. Part 2, Chapter 12 of A Guide to Health. Some accidents continued. Snake bite. There is no limit to the superstitions current among us in regard to snakes. From time immemorial, we have cultivated a terrible fear of the snake. We even dread the very mention of its name. The Hindus worship the serpent and have set apart a day in the year, Naga Panchami, for that purpose. They suppose that the earth is supported by the great serpent Sesha. God Vishnu is called Seshasai, and he is supposed to sleep on the serpent god, and God Shiva is supposed to have a garland of serpents around his neck. We say that such and such a thing cannot be described even by the 1,000-tongued Adisesha, implying our belief in the snake's knowledge and discretion. The serpent Karkotaka is said to have bitten King Nala and deformed him, so that he might not suffer any harm in the course of his wanderings. Such conceptions are also to be met with among the Christian nations of the West. In English, a man is very often described to be as wise and cunning as a serpent, and in the Bible, Satan is said to have assumed the shape of a serpent in order to tempt Eve. The real reason for the popular dread of snakes is obvious. If the snake's poison should spread over the whole body, death must necessarily ensue, and since the idea of death is so dreadful to us, we dread the very name of a snake. Hence, our worship of the snake is really based on our fear. If the snake were a little creature, it would hardly be worshipped by us, but since it is a big creature and a strangely fascinating one, it has come to be deified and worshipped. The Western scientists of today hold that the snake is merely a creature of instinct and it should be destroyed forthwith wherever found. From the official statistics, we gather that not less than 20,000 persons die every year in India of snake bite alone. The destruction of every venomous snake is rewarded by the state, but it is really a question if the country has benefited by it in any way. We find from experience that a snake never bites wantonly, but only as a retaliatory measure when it is molested in any way. Does this not bespeak its discretion or at least its innocence? The attempt to rid Hindustan or any portion thereof of snakes is as ridiculous and futile as trying to wrestle with the air. It may be possible to prevent snakes coming to a particular place by a systematic process of extermination, but this can never be done on a large scale. In a vast country like India, it would be an altogether foolish enterprise to try to avoid snake bites by wholesale destruction of the snakes. Let us never forget that the serpents have been created by the same God who created us and all creatures. God's ways are inscrutable, but we may rest assured that He did not create animals like the lion and tiger, the serpent and the scorpion, in order to bring about the destruction of the human race. If the serpents were to meet in council and conclude that man has been created by God for their destruction, seeing that He generally destroys a snake wherever found, should we approve of their conclusion? Surely not. In the same way, we are wrong in regarding the serpent as a natural enemy of man. The great Saint Francis of Assisi, who used to roam about the forest, was not hurt by the serpents or the wild beasts, but they even lived on the terms of intimacy with him. So too thousands of yogis and fakirs live in the forests of Hindustan amidst lions and tigers and serpents, but we never hear of their meeting death at the hands of these animals. It might, however, be contended that they must certainly be meeting their death in the forests, but that we do not hear of it as we live so far away. Granted, but we cannot deny that the number of yogis that live in the forests is nothing in comparison with that of the serpents and wild beasts, so that if these animals were really the natural enemies of man, the whole race of yogis and other dwellers in the forest should be become very rapidly extinct, especially since they have no weapons with which to defend themselves against their attacks. But they have by no means become extinct, and we may conclude therefore that they have been allowed to live unmolested in the forests by the serpents and wild beasts. In fact, I have implicit faith in the doctrine that so long as man is not inimical to the other creatures, they will not be inimical to him. Love is the greatest of the attributes of man. Without it, the worship of God would be an empty nothing. It is, in short, the root of all religion whatsoever. Besides, why should we not regard the cruelty of the serpents and the wild beasts as merely the product and reflection of a man's own nature? Are we any the less murderous than they? Are not our tongues as venomous as the serpent's fangs? Do we not prey upon our innocent brethren much in the same way as lions and leopards? All scriptures proclaim that when man becomes absolutely harmless, all the other animals will begin to live on terms of intimacy with him. When feuds and conflicts as fierce as that between the lion and the lamb are going on within our own breasts, is it any wonder that such things should go on in the external world? For we are but the reflection of the world around us. All the features of the external world are found reflected in the inner world of our mind. When we change our nature, the world around should also inevitably change. Do we not find that the world assumes a totally different aspect to those individual men and women who change their own nature by strenuous self-discipline? This is the great mystery of God's creation, as well as the great secret of true happiness. Our happiness or otherwise rests entirely upon what we are. We have no need to depend on other people at all in this matter. Our excuse for writing at such length on snakebite is this. Rather than merely prescribe cure for snakebite, we thought it as well to go a little more deeply into the matter and point out the best way of getting rid of our foolish fears. If even a single reader were to adopt in practice the principles we have been discussing, we shall consider our effort amply rewarded. Moreover, our object in writing these pages is not merely to give the generally accepted hygienic principles, but to go to the root of the matter and deal with the most fundamental principles of health. Modern investigations have also shown that the man who is perfectly healthy, whose blood has not been tainted by excess of heat, and whose food is wholesome and sattvic, is not immediately affected by the poison of the snake, but that, on the other hand, its effect is instantaneous as well as fatal on the man whose blood has been tainted by drink or unwholesome food. One doctor goes so far to say that the blood of the man who eschews salt and the like and lives exclusively on a fruit diet remains so pure that no kind of poison can have any effect on him. I have not had enough experience myself to say how far this is true. The man whose diet has been free from salt and the like for only 1 or 2 years cannot be said to have attained this stage of perfect immunity, for the blood which has been tainted and poisoned by bad practices continued for years cannot be brought back to its normal state of purity in the short period of a year or two. It has further been scientifically demonstrated that a man under the influence of fear or anger is much more and much sooner affected by the poison than when in the normal condition. Everybody knows how fear and anger make the pulse and the heartbeat faster than the normal rate, and the quicker the flow of blood in the veins, the greater the heat generated. But the heat generated by evil passions is not healthy, but extremely harmful. Anger is indeed nothing but a variety of fever. Hence the best antidote against snake bite is to use pure and sattvic food in moderation, to rid our minds of all evil passions like anger and fear, to refrain from giving away to panic, to retain perfect confidence in the saving power of a pure and godly life, and to remain self-possessed in the full faith that we are ever in God's hands, and that the span of life which He has allotted to us can on no account be curtailed or exceeded. Dr. Fitzsimmons, the director of Port Elizabeth Museum, who has devoted a large portion of his life to the study of snakes, their varieties and their habits, and who is a great authority on snake bite and its cure, has told us, as a result of his numerous experiments, that the majority of the so-called deaths by snake bite are really caused by fear and the wrong remedies applied by quacks. We should remember that all snakes are not venomous, and that even the bite of all venomous snakes is not immediately fatal either. Moreover, the snake do not always get an opportunity of injecting their venom into the body of their victim. We should not therefore give way to panic even when we are bitten by a venomous serpent, especially since very simple remedies are available which can be applied by ourselves without any aid from others. The part of the body immediately above the point at which the snake has bitten should be tied around with tight bandage, which should be further strengthened by means of strong pencils or pieces of wood so that the poison may not ascend through the veins. Then the wound should be cut half an inch deep with the fine point of a knife so that the poison blood may freely flow. And the hollow should be filled with the dark red powder sold in the bazaars known as potassium permanganate. If this is not available, the blood issuing from the wound should be well sucked and spat out by the patient himself or by somebody else until all the poison has been removed. Of course, no man who has a wound on the lips or the tongue should be allowed to suck this poisoned blood. This treatment should be applied within 7 minutes of the accident, that is to say, before the poison has had time to ascend and diffuse to the body. As already mentioned, the German doctor who has specialized in mud cure claims to have cured snake bite by burying the patient under fresh earth. Although I have not tried the use of mud in snake bites, I have undoubted faith in its efficacy from my experience in other cases. After the application of potassium permanganate or the sucking out of blood in the alternative, a poultice of mud half an inch in thickness and big enough to cover the whole region around and above the affected part should be applied. There should be kept in every home a quantity of well sifted and powdered mud in a tin ready for use. It should be so kept as to be exposed to light and air and free from dampness. Suitable bandages of cloth should also be kept so as to be within reach when needed. These will be found useful not only in snake bite but in numberless other cases as well. If the patient has lost consciousness or if respiration seems to have ceased, the process of artificial respiration already described in connection with drowning should be restored to. Hot water or preferably a decoction of cloves and the bark of the bay tree is very useful for recovering consciousness. The patient should be kept in the open air, but if his body seems to have taken cold, bottles of hot water should be employed, or a piece of flannel dipped in hot water and wrung out should be rubbed over the body to produce warmth. End of Chapter 12. Part 2, Chapter 13 of A Guide to Health. Some accidents, continued. Scorpion sting. Our familiar expression, "May God never give any man the pain of scorpion sting," shows how keen that pain is. In fact, this pain is even sharper than that of snake bite, but we do not dread it so much since it is much less fatal. Indeed, as Dr. Moore has said, the man whose blood is perfectly pure has little to fear from the sting of a scorpion. The treatment for scorpion sting is very simple. The affected part should be cut into with a sharp-pointed knife and the blood that issues from it slightly sucked out. A small bandage tied tightly above this portion would prevent the spread of the poison, while a poultice of mud would give immediate relief to the pain. Some writers advise us to tie a thick bandage of cloth over the affected part, wetted with a mixture of vinegar and water in equal proportions, or to keep the region around it immersed in salt water. But the poultice of mud is certainly the most effective remedy of all, as may be personally tested by those who have the misfortune to be stung by scorpions. The poultice should be as thick as possible. Even 2 seals of mud would not be too much for the purpose. If the finger be stung, for instance, the poultice should extend up to the elbow. If the hand be kept immersed for some time in wet mud in a pretty large vessel, it would give instant relief to the pain. The stings of the centipede and other animals should be dealt with exactly as that of the scorpion. End of Chapter 13.
Part 2, Chapter 14 of A Guide to Health. Conclusion. I have now said all that I intended to say on the subject of health. And now, before finally taking leave of my readers, I will say a word or two on my object in writing these pages. One question which I have asked myself again and again in the course of writing this book is why I, of all persons, should write it. Is there any justification at all for one like me, who am no doctor, and whose knowledge of the matters dealt with in these pages must be necessarily imperfect, attempting to write a book of this kind? My defense is this. The science of medicine is itself based upon imperfect knowledge, most of it being mere quackery. But this book, at any rate, has been prompted by the purest of motives. The attempt is here made not so much to show how to cure diseases as to point out the means of preventing them. And a little reflection will show that the prevention of disease is a comparatively simple matter, not requiring much specialist knowledge, although it is by no means an easy thing to put these principles into practice. Our object has been to show the unity of origin and treatment of all diseases, so that all people may learn to treat their diseases themselves when they do arise, as they often do, in spite of great care in the observance of the laws of health. But after all, why is good health so essential, so anxiously to be sought for? Our ordinary conduct would seem to indicate that we attach little value to health. If health is to be sought for in order that we might indulge in luxury and pleasure, or pride ourselves over our body and regard it as an end in itself, then indeed it would be far better that we should have bodies tainted with bad blood by fat and the like. All religions agree in regarding the human body as an abode of God. Our body has been given to us on the understanding that we should render devoted service to God with its aid. It is our duty to keep it pure and unstained from within as well as from without, so as to render it back to the giver when the time comes for it in the state of purity in which we got it. If we fulfill the terms of the contract to God's satisfaction, He will surely reward us and make us heirs to immortality. The bodies of all created beings have been gifted with the same senses, and the same capacity for seeing, hearing, smelling, and the like. But the human body is supreme among them all, and hence we call it a chintamani, or a giver of all good. Man alone can worship God with knowledge and understanding. Where devotion to God is void of understanding, there can be no true salvation. And without salvation, there can be no true happiness. The body can be of real service only when we realize it to be a temple of God and make use of it for God's worship. Otherwise, it is no better than a filthy vessel of bones, flesh, and blood, and the air and water issuing from it are worse than poison. The things that come out of the body through the pores and other passages are so filthy that we cannot touch them or even think of them without disgust, and it requires very great effort to keep them tolerably clean. Is it not most disgraceful that, for the sake of this body, we should stoop to falsehood and deceit, licentious practices, and even worse? Is it not equally shameful that, for the sake of these vices, we should be so anxious to preserve this fragile frame of ours at any cost? This is the truth of the matter in regard to our body. For the very things which are the best or the most useful have inherent in them capabilities of a corresponding mischief. Otherwise, we should hardly be able to appreciate them at their true worth. The light of the sun, which is the source of our life, and without which we cannot live for an hour, is also capable of burning all things to ashes. So, too, a king may do infinite good to his subjects, or be the source of untold mischief. Indeed, the body may be a good servant, but when it becomes a master, its powers of evil are unlimited. There is an incessant struggle going on within us between our soul and Satan for the control of our body. If the soul gains the ascendancy, the body becomes the most potent instrument of good. But if the devil is victorious in the struggle, it becomes a hotbed of vice. Hell itself would be preferable to the body, which is the slave of vice, which is constantly filled with decaying matter, and which emits filthy odors, whose hands and feet are employed in unworthy deeds, whose tongue is employed in eating things that ought not to be eaten, or in uttering language that ought not to be uttered, whose eyes are employed in seeing things that ought not to be seen, whose ears are employed in the hearing of things that ought not to be heard, and whose nose is employed in the smelling of things that ought not to be smelt. But while hell is never mistaken for heaven by anybody, our body, which is rendered worse than hell by ourselves, is, strangely enough, regarded by us as almost heavenly. So monstrous is our vanity, and so pitiful our pride in this matter. Those who would make use of a palace as a latrine, or vice versa, must certainly reap the fruit of their folly. So too, if while our body is really in the devil's hands, we should fancy that we are enjoying true health, we shall have only ourselves to thank for the terrible consequences that are sure to follow. To conclude, then, our attempt in these pages has been to teach the great truth that perfect health can be attained only by living in obedience to the laws of God and defying the power of Satan. True happiness is impossible without true health, and true health is impossible without a rigid control of the palate. All the other senses will automatically come under our control when the palate has been brought under control, and he who has conquered his senses has really conquered the whole world, and he becomes a part of God. We cannot realize Rama by reading the Ramayana, or Krishna by reading the Gita, or God by reading the Koran, or Christ by reading the Bible. The only means of realizing them is by developing a pure and noble character. Character is based on virtuous action, and virtuous action is grounded on truth. Truth, then, is the source and foundation of all things that are good and great. Hence, a fearless and unflinching pursuit of the ideal of all truth and righteousness is the keynote of true health, as of all else. And if we have succeeded, in however feeble a measure, in bringing this grand fact home to our reader, our object in writing these pages would have been amply fulfilled. End of chapter 14, and end of A Guide to Health by Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, translated by A. Rama Iyer.